All right, here we are for our show for Monday, July 27th. I'm Sharif Yunus here with Dr. Kevin Majors.
Good morning.
So, Kevin, have you been reading any interesting books lately?
Uh, let's see. I keep going back to the book, The Master and His Emissary. And I know two people in the last 2 days have told me that they're listening to that book as an audiobook. And
Hmm.
I can't imagine because the book has 7,000 footnotes. I don't know how
Yeah.
you do that with the audiobook. But The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. And I actually read one afternoon because it's so short. What was the name of that book? There's another Ian
Ways of
McGilchrist book.
Attending.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Ways
Yeah.
to Attending, which is a very short read. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know, 40 Kindle pages.
Right.
But The Master's Emissary is fascinating. And also Bleak House, reading Bleak House. Watch that series too. It's great. 2005.
Nice.
How about you, Sharif? What are you reading?
Well, I also just read Two Ways of Attending.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I saw it on because you had mentioned to me to read up on Ian McGilchrist, Master and His Emissary, and it was just too long. So I went on Amazon and saw that he had this other book, Ways of Attending, and some of the reviewers said this is a great summary of Master and His Emissary. So I figured maybe I'll be able to satisfy that requirement just by reading this. So I thought it was very helpful in understanding the breakdown of left brain, right brain, kind of making it very clear. So I'd like at some point soon to be able to dive into Master and His Emissary and get the kind of fuller picture that he presents there.
Absolutely. And I think this can be a great source because we have this initiative called optimalscience.org, where we're trying to essentially have all the scientific literature that is behind optimal work put in one place. But man, the bibliography of Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary, it, I don't know,
Staggering.
practically everything is in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's a whole book in and of itself.
it is.
Good. Well, so I thought since we started these sessions kind of in response to the coronavirus and people facing new work situations and wanting to help people address those challenges. And then, so we did our first couple sessions on kind of coronavirus specific related problems of working from
Hmm.
home and dealing with a new schedule and remote work and things like that. Uh, I wanted to get back a little bit to that. And specifically, we had a question from someone sent in about motivation. And I think
Hmm.
I've seen this in a number of people is that as this kind of drags on and maybe they haven't like really engaged with people in work personally, you kind of start to feel a little detachment from work. I think one of the so kind of getting into the idea of motivation. How do we sustain our motivation? What are the sources of motivation? How do we tap into those to work better? So I wanted to get your thoughts. First of all, just Kevin, like, what is motivation? I would have a tough time just defining it besides saying motivation is what gets me motivated, but then I'm just using the word in the definition. So
Yeah,
that's not super
exactly.
helpful.
Well, let me ask you, Sharif, have
Yeah.
you ever said to yourself, I just feel so motivated today. What am I going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Usually, well, actually, no, I wouldn't say. So those two things usually would not come at the same time, right? So if I'm saying I feel really motivated, usually it's because I have something that I know that I want to do.
Exactly. So it's the motivation is like the response to the opportunity in front of you.
Hmm.
And I think that's the way motivation is. It's always the result of the reframing that you've done or the like putting in the frame of what is the best thing that I can do right now. And that's probably not going to be YouTube. Unless maybe it's watching this. It's probably not going to be, just wasting time on things. No one ever feels like so motivated, by checking their email.
Yeah.
Or you don't just feel motivation is always for something. So now the problem is people can turn being motivated into a kind of outcome they seek, and and that becomes, I think, a problem because really it becomes an excuse to not do things. So what happens is people wait for a certain subjective level of motivation, and then they say, okay, now I'll do it, and I'll get started on that. I think that's motivation can be a game that people play with themselves.
Mm.
Yeah, and it just becomes another reason to delay. And what usually happens is they procrastinate because of it, and they keep procrastinating until finally they have enough like adrenaline and drive, because there could be some bad outcome,
Like a
that
deadline that's, yeah.
yeah, there's some deadline, and like, okay, now I have to do it. So people use then the emotion of anxiety or fear to then
Mhm.
make up that gap. But when they're acting under a pressure of a deadline, they don't reflect to themselves how motivated they feel. Right? They wouldn't like while
Yeah.
they're actually, so it might be that, okay, let's say that you have to, write a paper. And so then the paper's due in a certain, it's due, tomorrow. Well, if I don't start it by, 3 p.m. today, there's no way I'm gonna go to bed tonight. And then preserving sleep gives them
A
enough
motive.
kind of urgency of
Mhm.
motivation. Yeah. So I think this thing about motivation is, you know, it it can be that people substitute the motive by using fear or anxiety. Another thing, people substitute anger. Like they really need to address the situation. Maybe they were passed up for a promotion or a raise, or maybe something their spouse does really should be addressed. There's something unfair going on, but they wait and wait and wait, until finally they blow up. Now there you can see that they were using their anger to get themselves to do things.
Mhm.
And you could ask them in that moment, hey, right now, do you feel really motivated to shout these things? And I guess they would say yes. You know, but so you can either draw motives from your emotions, or you can draw them from your ideals. And that's when it's really a response to the frame you're putting it in.
Mhm. That last point kind of reminded me of Ian McGilchrist, actually, with the left brain, right brain sources of motivation, because he talks about the left brain can either, which is the left brain is what's really good at obtaining outcomes, figuring out how am I
Mhm.
going to get this thing, can either serve the emotions or ideals. Um,
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people actually are using emotional strategies to get what they want. I mean, we know that we all did that as kids. You put on a play, you get all upset, and you have dramatic things trying
mhm.
to get what you want. You might not actually feel that upset about it, but it's just a strategy you're using. And so a lot of times emotions are used as like a driving force to obtain an outcome. And I think that outcomes lend themselves to that because it's something so material, so tangible that the
Mhm.
person doubles down on, I have to get this. And the emotions respond to those tangible things more easily than they do to ideals. I don't think, you're not with ideals and trying to actually like help the people around you as much as you can, and to serve them. That's not going to have the same emotional drawing power, but it can
Mhm.
be way more deeply motivating. The motivation that comes from ideals and love and service uh, can make it so that being tired is irrelevant, being anxious is irrelevant. None of those emotions matter anymore because you're so like committed to doing what you have, like what you can best do here for people.
Mhm. So if so, generally, so you're saying there are two kind of sources of motivation: ideals, emotions.
Yep.
And so if you're motivated by ideals, though, like service, then that's something that you can always tap into. You can always feel motivated by, because there's always opportunities to be serving those people around you, to be growing
That's right.
yourself. Whereas if you're kind of motivated more by emotions and satisfaction or fear, then you're leaving your emotions up. You're leaving your motivation to up to the circumstances. Like you're only going to feel motivated if there's a deadline coming, or you're only
Exactly.
going to feel motivated if there's some urgent thing to be taken care of,
Yeah.
or there's something that you like feel like you really want,
Yep. And if you're
something that you
relying on
desire.
emotions for motivation, the result is drama. You get like dramatic moments. The
Yeah.
deadline is approaching and now there's drama
Yeah.
about, will I get it?
Yeah.
Or, you're trying to
That's how you
get what you
keep life
want
interesting, right?
exactly with drama. And so this sense of like using drama, that's a sign that your motives are actually coming from your left brain.
Hmm.
And it's these essentially it's the emotions become means that they should do. Emotions are usually just the result of things, but you can also use them as means. Well, all of that drama is a little bit like extraordinary, and you want like big things, big outcomes,
Right.
total change. I think we see this in our society right now. A lot of people want dramatic, immediate changes,
Yeah.
but generally speaking, sometimes those things are justified and necessary, but there is a more general way, which is more ordinary, which is little by little, bit by bit. Most growth that you observe in nature happens bit by bit. It's an organic process of growing. And it's not going to be a dramatic thing, but it's, in a sense, it's like it just keeps going.
Hmm.
And so the tree can grow to enormous heights, but it doesn't do it in huge spurts generally. And if it does, that's still super slow motion.
Yeah.
So there's a sense about when we're aiming for growth and service, we have a more secure progress bit by bit, and that's really how growth occurs. So I think that there's a sense that instead of aiming for big things, you kind of are
Hmm.
aiming for continual little things.
Hmm.
And motives of love and service can come out continually. But each little thing you do is somehow informed by that motive. Whereas if you're relying on emotions, it's just like super big things and dramatic moments that
Yeah.
get, pushed by the emotion.
Yeah. And then life, your day, which is made up of little things, oftentimes those little things can kind of get you feel like they're annoying or boring or frustrating. So it actually happens that the majority of your time is actually kind of spent in frustration because you don't see those as contributing to the bigger outcomes that you're
Yeah,
actually,
so you
which is
end
what
up
you're.
like most of life is almost all of life, even super big things are made up of many little things.
Hmm.
And so if you're looking for dramatic moments in life to give it meaning and motivation,
Hmm.
then I think you're going to be frustrated always. But if you can find the way of those little things being leavened with your higher motives, so bringing your highest ideals into the smallest actions,
Hmm.
then you have unlimited growth as a potential. Because basically, then anything you're doing, even walking down the street and going upstairs, there are little ways of doing them with a little more love. So, love is something that you can actually put into anything, into any small action. One thing is doing it because it's loving to do it, but there's also a way you can put love into it, which people can only know by experience. But there's an experience of putting love into these little things that actually keeps people on the most stable path of growth.
So that's something that all of our viewers and listeners should experiment with and try for themselves. You have to learn it through experience, putting
Yeah,
love into
so
little things in that way.
in a sense, the greatness of the love is measured by how little it can become. And if it can show itself in even the smallest little subtle ways, that's actually a much more rich, full, intense love.
Hmm.
That because it's like life getting in the smallest things. Um, and so it doesn't need big things.
So how would you, if, we always often think of, okay, if you want to practice something or grow in something, then make it the focus of your daily golden hour. So if we have someone who wants to, get more motivated, then one thing we're saying is, okay, let's back up because it might be that you're motivated by these kind of bigger outcome or uh, emotional outcomes, emotional goals, and then those don't actually become practical throughout the day, so they don't actually motivate you to do things. So we're trying to get you to focus more on the process and to look at the ideals and service. Then so how do you do that in a golden hour? How would you recommend that people put this into practice in their daily golden hour?
I think you really do just need a few things. One is you do need the right purpose. And that's what brings in the context. So to think of your life as a whole, and how could this next hour of work touch on what matters most for you? Okay, so you try to see like either the best way you can grow in it,
Mm-hmm.
or the way that you can help others the most through it, even if it's down the line still, but that's what you're ultimately intending with this. So I think part of it is learning how to bring higher intentions into your work right from the start, so that you are consciously aiming for those intentions. There's something about this, you know um, the question of motivation that just raises the issue of sincerity, right? And how is like, and what I'm doing right now, I'm sitting down to work. Am I just trying to get it done, or am I sincerely trying to serve, right? So and to really give my best in this
Mm-hmm.
hour. So I think that in the golden hour, the purpose step is what touches on motive, and that's the main thing. The other thing though that touches on it is that you, in some little way, are improving how you go about doing this kind of work, so that there is a challenge you're setting for yourself, and that challenge then allows you to be like generous in trying to give your best in this next hour of work.
Is there any role that we have the triad: sincerity, humility, generosity, and you mentioned sincerity and generosity. So I'm wondering,
Hmm.
why'd you leave humility out? Is no? Does
Yeah,
humility have a role to play here too?
yeah. So humility is the forgetting of self. And so it means letting go of any outcomes that we're aiming for self
Mm-hmm.
satisfaction. So it's not about me, it's not about how I feel, it's not about how I look.
Mm-hmm.
So I think humility has a kind of protective role here. It is
Yeah,
important. It doesn't necessarily chart the course as much, because
yeah,
that's really charted by sincerity and then carried out by generosity. But it certainly protects it from any self seeking or kind of ego seeking that could take you off track here.
mm-hmm.
If you're thinking, like, well, why would I, I'm not going to do this for someone unless they are, that there's some quid pro quo. I need to get
Yeah,
something back. And
yeah.
you're, all of that, bringing yourself and what you get out of this
Yep.
needs to be removed from the consideration, so that instead you focus on what's the best reason for doing it and what's the
Mm-hmm.
best way of doing it, and you give your best in it.
Mm-hmm. So how do you kind of carry this out over the long term? Because you're saying, okay, you can't just be motivated purely by your feelings. Sometimes you seems like you're saying sometimes you might have to go against the grain and serve, even if you act according to your ideals, even if you don't feel like it. And then so we just have to kind of do this for the rest of our lives. That sounds kind of tough.
Mhm.
So how do you
Well,
really
it
like
does.
do that? And
It's tough depending on your view of sacrifice.
mhm,
So if you see that really what gives you motivation, to embrace opportunities and make the best of them to grow and serve, that is love. So love really is motivation, but it's an active kind of love. Here it's not love just responding to, it's not like a passive response like emotions, but love actively seeking the best. Now, love grows the more you sacrifice for the sake of it. If you think of how many parents have sacrificed better jobs, because they wanted to be in this school system for their kids, and they wanted to not have this commute. They wanted to have. There are all these sacrifices that that parents make of their um, interests or time or careers that end up making them even more deeply committed and loving for their family. And so sacrifice show, like, the willingness to make sacrifice really is essential to love. But then love itself grows when you make sacrifices for it. And so I do think there's a sense in which we need this willingness to always let go of any outcome that we could be seeking, so that we can really uh, grow the most in loving and serving others.
okay, that's a lesson that I'll try and take to
Great.
heart this week, Kevin.
Well, hopefully,
Um,
me too. remind ourselves of these things. Great.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, that's it for this session. We'll be back with another one next week.
All right. Take care.